Hi, everybody, and welcome to Unchurned. I'm Josh Schachter, founder and CEO of UpdateAI. Joining me today is Geoffrey Moore. Jeff Moore, he's a venture partner at Wildcat Venture Partners and Moore Davidow Ventures. He's the principal of his own consulting business. He's advisor to many leading tech companies in Silicon Valley. He's the best-selling author of several book titles, including my all-time favorite business title, Crossing the Chasm, also Inside the Tornado, most recently, The Infinite Staircase, a book about ethics and mortality. Welcome, Jeff. I'm so honored to have you on the program.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Josh. It's good to be here, and I have great feelings about Idea Lab and Bill and Marcia. So great to be part of the family.
So for listeners out there, Bill Gross is our co-founder. He's the chairman of Idea Lab. Marcia, the president of Idea Lab, and they helped us with a connection to Geoffrey today. So I felt a lot of pressure in that intro when I was writing it up last night, Geoffrey. It was pretty vanilla, pretty mundane. I can't say like Geoffrey Moore, the CEO of Salesforce, or the Malcolm Gladwell with of this book. But like if you accrue all that you've done, it is at that level. So I felt like really that was just an injustice of vomiting out like not little, but like these things that all add up. How would you present your bio to our guests? And please don't be humble.
Well, so rather the bio is that I've been involved in high tech consulting role for 35 or 40 years. I think the thing that I'm really good at and that kind of creates the cumulative impact that I've been able to have is I'm good at framing situations in terms of what are the forces at work in those things and how are they operating, and then creating a vocabulary that people can can understand those ideas pretty crisply, and most importantly, they're very actionable. In other words, there's in every book I've written, there's a description followed by a prescription, and I think that willingness to be prescriptive is what people appreciate.
There's so much layered inside what you just said. It's all about simplifying the message. It's all about being a layman, so to speak, understanding the high tech, but bringing that down so that everybody understands it at the same level playing field, and then actionability. And one of the things that, as the CEO of an AI company, like one of our mantras that we hold on to, our principles, is to be actionable. It's not just AI for the sake of AI. So yeah. I love that you have that same principle in your work and in your writing.
Well, if you want to, basically, if you're an advisor, you want to have impact. And so if you're not having impact, it's kind of like, what's the point? So that's why the actionability is so critical.
Yeah, you should share that with all the advisors out there. That's not always.
Maybe the point is, no, I just want to give you a lot of advice and collect a little a fee, and then I'm off to Maui. Where are you going?
I worked in consulting for 5 years, so I know how it goes.
All right, okay, yeah, okay. Right, we won't go there.
So, I want to get unchurned, in homage to the title of our podcast here for SaaS leaders. We want to go raw and authentic with you and some pseudo rapid fire questions. Where were you born and where do you live now?
Well, I was born in Portland, Oregon, and I currently live in Los Altos Hills behind Stanford in the Bay Area.
Not a bad place to influence tech leaders. You've taught so many people about business and now about ethics and mortality recently. Who is somebody in your career, whether you've known them or not, that you've really looked up to and learned a lot from?
For me, there's been a handful of CEO leaders that I've never run a large company, so I'm in one sense I'm just always sort of humbled and amazed by them. But there are people that you go, wow, that person is doing something that I hope I can help other people do. So Mark Benioff at Salesforce is one. Chi Lu at Microsoft is one. They were the two behind the book Zone to Win. Jeff Miller early on in my career at Documentum was one. They're people that you just go, wow, they're charismatic leaders. They're authentic. They take on challenging problems, but they do it in a way that's approachable. They have empathy, but they also have accountability. It's very inspiring. And so they've been the people I think I've tried to sort of live up to.
You mentioned that you've never led a large company in your career. And if I look at your background, which makes sense as an author of many best-selling books, you've got a bachelor's in American literature, from Stanford. You have a PhD in English literature from the University of Washington. You taught English at a university for 4 years. You've never been the CEO of a large company or an executive at a large company. Are you a charlatan?
Yeah, good question. That's fair, because basically I'm going to call myself an entrepreneur, which sometimes people confuse with the word charlatan. But the idea is, Maria and I wanted to move back to the Bay Area in 1978. I'd been teaching at a small college in Michigan, and we had to start over. There were going to be no jobs in academics. It was not going to happen. So I joined a software company and I said, look, I don't know anything about tech, but I know a little something about training. And they said, well, we'll help you out. And so from then on, so I learned tech, and that originally is like an extended metaphor. It's like, I don't know what these things are, but I'm sort of metaphorically figuring it out. And then at some point, the language became, well, wait a minute, it's not really a metaphor. That's really actually how it actually works. So I was kind of always this person trying to process the models, process the frameworks, what was going on. And so, and I started in sales, but ended up in marketing. And then I ended up at this company, Regis McKenna, which was the transformative thing for me. Regis it was a frameworks guy also. He was many other things, but I kind of became the toolsmith. I was I was just like the frameworks guy, like Scotty. I wasn't Captain Kirk. I wasn't Spock. I was Scotty. I was digging in the having fun with that. But in that process, I started by taking over a software practice because I came out of the software industry. But very quickly, everybody else figured it out, and even I figured it out. My span of control is 1. I can have nobody reporting to me. It doesn't work. I'm not good at it. I love people. We have a good time, but I'm a terrible manager. So
is that still today?
Absolutely. It's called catalytic consulting. You don't consume the catalyst. Just put the catalyst in the ingredient, let the reaction go. And so, and the catalyst is, and it goes back to being a seminar. Basically, I'm a seminar. I'm just an English major trying to find work. So basically, every one of my consulting sessions is a seminar where the key skill of the seminar is ask the next most interesting question and base it on the last answer. Don't just have a list of questions. React in real time, be in the moment. And that was what I was good at. And so people would say, well, we want you to sit down on this client meeting. And then, well, why don't you sit down on this? Well, why don't you give a talk? Well, why don't you write a book? Well, blah, blah, blah. And even the groups, the consulting practices we had, the Chasm Group and TCG Advisors and Chasm Institute, they're all based on saying, install the vocabulary and then help people use the vocabulary. And that's the game.
You're just a guy trying to earn a living in Los Altos.
Yeah. Well, okay. It's a tough one. Okay. But by the way, I have to confess, if you are an advisor and there's a pandemic and people have nothing better to do than to get onto Zoom, your business goes up. It does not go down.
I've learned that actually from other folks.
You want to be an advisor, find a large pandemic, and you'll be good.
No, I saw that actually with several advisors. I actually do want to react to what you said in the moment, like you just mentioned a second ago. I'd love to dig in a little bit into your, what is it, catalytic leadership of why you only like to go from 0 to 1 with your leadership. Because I did notice on your LinkedIn in preparing for this conversation, I expect you, I'm the managing director of this, managing director of that. No, you're a venture partner. You're a sidearm guy. So what's that about? Like, how far into childhood does that go into?
I was younger brother. I mean, my older brother kind of dictated terms. So he was going to be the CEO. The fact that I went into business and became successful in business was like the biggest shock in the world to everyone in my family, me most, because that was just not going to be the program. But my power if you think about liberal arts education, why do you go into liberal arts education? It's because you want to empower your students. You want them to become more powerful. And therefore you figure out, well, what's holding the student back? Why aren't they more powerful? And then you interrogate and you learn, you see patterns, you say, oh, I see why they're not more powerful. Well, maybe we can work on that. Same thing in consulting, same game exactly. My clients are smarter they have IQs that are way off the chart, but they got blind spots. And part about being a consultant, particularly now that I've advised, hundreds of companies in situations, you get pattern recognition. You say, oh, I know what's going on. And everybody's got a blind spot somewhere. So that's kind of how, and the idea is as long as you're willing not to be the story, the key to the catalytic consulting is it's never about you. If as soon as you make it about you, you're in trouble. So that's as long as it's about the problem and about the situation, and then you're sort of like finding that little way to jiggle the handle and get things moving along. That's it.
You're a humanities guy. I mean, listening to you talk right now, you're a philosopher, you're an anthropologist, you're a psychologist, right?
Yeah. Just don't say math, and I'll be fine.
Yeah. But how cool is that, right? Like, how cool is that? Because somebody else who I respect in venture, and I'm sure he's probably a chum of yours, John Doerr, right? And talk about measure what matters and analytics, and you go into these conferences and MRR, ARR, CAC ratio, LTV ratio, it's all metrics. But here's somebody who is right now saying stay away, and yet you've been so powerful in business and been such a inspiration to many. So I think it's really cool.
Well, great. Well, I'm glad. Thanks.
All right. Enough flattery. By the way, I've said it to others, kind of that I know in the past. I majored in industrial engineering. So heavy quant. And I always kind of felt split brain between quant and creative. But I went that direction in undergrad, because I thought it would be most just, effective, right? And relevant to what I wanted to do in business. Looking back, I've thought to myself sometimes, if I had to do it over again, I might major in English, because I found that just the power of good writing and articulation and grammar and diction is just so important. And I think it's starting to get lost a little bit. And so I think it's really amazing that you've come from that background and that's empowered you.
I think the longer you are in the career, the more it pays off. I think the place it's the hardest to be an English liberal arts major is to getting your first job, because you look at your resume and it's like, well, yeah, but where do you penetrate? And so the STEM thing is like, the good thing about a STEM major is you're going to land your first job with a good STEM resume, virtually for certain. And then the question is later on, maybe that's when you start thinking, well, as I broaden the aperture, I'm not as well prepared.
And you don't know this, but you've taught me a little bit about the English language, because I read your book first in 2008. I was 24 years old. I'm 38 now. And I became such a fan of that book. And I would tell people at happy hours, startup happy hours and that, oh, you've got to read this book, Crossing the Chasm. It's such a great, powerful book, Crossing the Chasm. And at one point, somebody kind of just looked at me quizzically. They're like, what? Did you mean chasm? No, chasm. Here's CHASM. No, it's chasm. So I went and I looked up the word, and then, the pronunciation of it. And because of your book, I now know how to pronounce the word chasm. So just letting you know that fun fact.
Well, I just want you to know that John Chambers, who was the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers used to, to this day, I'm sure he says Crossing the Chasm. But, when people after you come and speak, chasm works for me. Go ahead.
You buy the book, it doesn't matter. And I'll take John Chambers as good company. Okay, so we're in an economic downturn. We're approaching it. We're somewhere in those lines. You were obviously around and very active in the business world in 2008. The last time we were in a similar type of place like this with our economy, you authored an article, paper in the Harvard Business Review called "In a Downturn, Provoke Your Customers." First question is, right now we're in Q4 2022. What are you seeing that's similar and that's different to 2008?
Well, I do think, we're going to have a downturn. There's just too much stuff going on in the world. And it's masked by the fact that we had this huge overspend, perhaps appropriate, but we had this huge relief project, and we're still having some of that money in the system. So, for example, this quarter, GDP was up. But I think most people feel like we're in for darker sledding. It's very different from 2008. It's also different from 2001. So there are two downturns in this century that I've been through. In 2001, it was really a tech downturn. There was a tech bubble pop. So the rest of the economy was like, okay. And arguably 2008 was a financial systems downturn. And again, the fact that it affected the rest of the economy, but it was because the financial system was being affected, not because the economy was at risk. So I think what's very different about that today is the whole concept of a globalized economy is at risk. Because of the geopolitical issues, both in the Ukraine and with China and whatnot, we're going to be reconfiguring the supply chain. It's going to get less efficient before it becomes more efficient. And eventually, I think with technology, everything will become more efficient. We're going to go through a downturn. And of course, the pandemic didn't help. And there's a bunch of forces. So the important thing then for somebody in a startup or in any business is the way you play business with tailwinds, it's like sailing. When you have a tailwind, you put up a spinnaker. When you have headwinds, you take down the spinnaker and you learn how to tack a boat. And so basically, the most important thing that leaders listening to this podcast need to do is understand it's time to take out the playbooks and revisit your playbook. And basically, the first rule in a downturn is don't take your customer's budget for granted. Whereas in an upturn, and in good times you do. In good times you qualify a customer. If they don't have budget, you don't call on them. But in a downturn, even if they do have budget, they may not have permission to spend it. And so then the question is, well, what do you do instead? And this gets to the provoke your customer point in the article, which is in a downturn, you have to either create budget or more likely what you have to do is redirect budget. And the way you redirect budget is you say, look, there is a place that you're not investing that you should be investing. And you make a very compelling case for saying, now is the time for you to move the budget from A to B. And by the way, once it's at B, I can compete for it because that's the reason I'm telling you this story is I want to tell you what I do. But I can't sell it to you if you don't have budget for it and don't have priority to spend that budget. And so the provoke sales call was all about you need to reframe your understanding of your business. You need to reframe the understanding of the risks you're exposed to and the opportunity. It's mostly, by the way, about risk, not opportunity. In a downturn, people are much more worried about plugging the leaks in the boat than they are about sailing to Tahiti. So basically, it's like, okay, how do I fix so it's got to be very immediate and very pressing, and it's usually a problem or a risk. And so, and because they've had good times, they've kind of shoved it out like tech debt. Tech debt, well, a little more tech debt, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's not going to be okay. And so that's the sort of thing you do in a downturn. You focus on the things that are challenging your customer, where their business is at risk, and you align your company directly with how to plug that leak in their business model.
Okay, that is very actionable advice. How do you divert? So it sounds like this is objection handling, right? And what you're saying here is, no, I don't have budget. Okay, great. Well, let's get you some budget. And so how do you do that? How do you divert? My product right now, our beachhead, to use the terms of your framework, is customer success. And customer success is invaluable, indispensable to SaaS corporations, to many beyond SaaS, but to SaaS corporation. And now boardrooms are starting to recognize that, the importance of net revenue retention and those sorts of metrics. However, when you look at the studies, and I saw a survey recently that showed that while leaders are most interested in NRR, the software that they are investing in is most closely aligned with demand generation.
Yes.
And it completely at odds with what they're saying and what they're doing, right?
Yes.
And so, like, I don't know, Jeff, now is the time where we should all be investing in our existing customers and expanding them and not losing them, right? But is there some psychology that just keeps drawing people to sales and to the new shiny toy? And how do I objection handle that and help have that conversation as a platform that is right now approaching decision makers in customer success?
Yeah, so let's be clear. With tailwinds, it's smart to be worried about the top of the funnel. I mean, basically processing the top of the funnel will lead to stuff at the bottom of the funnel. We're not worried about budget being redirected or whatever. We're just going to try to make it work. In a downturn, a couple of things will happen. First of all, how do you lose money in a downturn? Well, one is you spend the money at the top of the funnel. By the way, people are interested. They care. You work them through the sales cycle. But when you get to the bottom, a whole bunch just defect, either because they couldn't get the budget or it wasn't going to get prioritized. So think about not only the absolute cost, but the opportunity cost of processing all those deals to no outcome. So that's number one. Number two is this notion of, you go look at customer success and you say, okay, customer success is really key to retention. Obviously, it's an important thing. But the customer success manager doesn't control their budget. It's not their budget. It's the chief revenue officer, or whoever you want to put that highest level, who says, I'm going to take my budget, I'm going to put some in marketing, I'm going to put some in sales, and I'm going to put some in customer success. In a tailwind, you say, I'm going to put more in marketing and more in sales, and I'll do, customer success, God bless. But even if I have a bunch of churn, I'm growing so damn fast at the front end, I can live with certain amount of leaking in the boat. In a downturn, just turn the priority absolutely around. Your chances of getting a new logo in a downturn are dramatically worse. Not just sort of worse. They're god-awful worse. Because in a downturn, the last thing you want to do is onboard a new vendor. So on the other hand, your install base becomes your practical point of growth. And first of all, by the way, let's just not have shrinkage, right? So how do I maintain my base? But the good news is the money they have, they're going to spend it with their existing vendors. And the bigger the vendor you are, the more likely it is that you're able to consolidate around you. So if you're Gainsight competing against Salesforce, in a tailwind world, Gainsight has a lot of advantage. It's got one product to sell. It knows how to sell it really well. There's people got budget for it. But in a downturn, Salesforce has the advantage because they say, well, yeah, Gainsight's great, by the way. But, we add our little module here, and really, frankly, you got pretty much what you need. And by the way, I can give it to you for 7 cents and, blah, blah, blah. So I think in a downturn, go ahead.
No. This is great. Okay, so now I want the free advice since you're on the podcast with me here. What if you're UpdateAI? Yeah. What if you are a 2-year-old startup that is just hitting their pace and has high growth objectives, but you're small, you're a minnow.
Right. Nobody. But first of all, championing your hey, I want to talk to you about Update. Who? It's like a Chasm Group. What's the Chasm Group? Okay, so the first thing is, it can't be about you. It's just like, okay, your mom, but nobody else. So then the issue is, okay, so what can it
By the
do?
way, my mom has no idea what I do. She hasn't.
By the way, moms, God bless. Yeah. Moms never do, and it's perfect. Okay, so what can you do? So okay, and you said, look, I want to take my technology, which, as you and I have discussed, has very broad applications across many disciplines. Most obviously, sales at scale. But you're small and you're starting, so you're saying, okay, I want to have a beachhead. And we've talked about customer success as a beachhead. So you say, okay, but why would someone in a downturn spend money in customer success that you could compete for? And if the answer is, well, your customers will be happier, happiness is not exactly the currency of a downturn. So what would? Well, you in a downturn, if you lose customers, first of all, we said customers is your best opportunity, but if you lose customers, the impact, because you can't replace them, the impact on your business model is devastating. And so most people say, well, we've been tracking our NRR, we've been tracking our attrition, our retention rate, we have statistics, it's blah, blah, blah. And part of the provocation, I think, at this point would be, yeah, but that's not, you cannot expect that to continue in the future. You're going to be under enormous pressure. What are you doing to improve take the leaks in your boat and patch them now? Because you're going to head into a stormy weather. And if you have leaks in the boat, and so I would make it all about leaks in the boat. And then your software has very interesting capabilities to patch a whole bunch of leaks in the customer success boat. And so it's like, okay.
So UpdateAI, we've built the world's best detection of action items on Zoom meetings. But who cares? That's about me, right? Like that's like cut me off there.
Yes. I should put a big plaque on the wall. Best ever.
Yeah. Who gives? Who gives a shit, right? Like you cool. You got cool data science. Is it actionable? Okay, great. So it's actionable. So we detect those action items in your calls with customers. Okay. Who cares, right? I think we're going now one level deeper.
Exactly.
So, okay, great. That's the actionability. That's the what. Okay, well, if Right now, you have to do whatever it takes to keep your existing customers. Is the lessons we've just learned from you, Geoffrey.
Why? In other words, you said you did the what. By the way, remember Simon Sinek. You start with why, right? So why would I do this? And the answer is I would do this to protect the health of my net recurring revenue business. And basically, it's the idea, it's almost like getting vaccinated. You haven't gotten COVID yet. For Christ's sake, get vaccinated. Don't get COVID without the vaccination. In other words,
protect your health. So protect those relationships. Have the conversations with customers. Be able to meet with them to build the relationship, because we know that relationships matter when they're looking at budget sheets. And the only way that you're going to be able to increase your coverage ratio, so to speak, and have more of those conversations effectively is our tool. Not the only way, but that is what our tool is helping you do to make sure that you can have
because customer success managers aren't the most senior people in your company. So you can't expect them to be like the most gifted. So, but what you hire them for normally is they have empathy, they have conversation, they have curiosity, they care, they lean in. And then if you have this tool behind it, says, and by the way, I will make sure that you are actionable, and I will give you a priority. This is like next best action, and that's what AI is so good at. Right? Here are all the stuff you got to do. They'll be diligent, they'll be conscientious, but they need help. And without that help, they'll have goodwill, but they'll have mediocre practice, and mediocre practice is what creates the leak in the boat.
Yeah. Good. I'm taking my notes. So let's go to. I know you wrote this book in 1991. So what is that? 31 years ago. Jeez.
Yeah, you were born. Well, you were born in 19.
I was 84.
Okay, so you at the time you could have read it. You would have been 7. But
yeah,
you weren't that precocious. Okay, all right, okay.
And my birthday, by the way, in 1984, is the first words in the book 1984.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Cool.
So listen, I've bought 5 copies of your book, Crossing the Chasm. One for myself. I think actually maybe 2 for myself. I think I bought one a few years later to reread. And then for people that worked for me in product management when I was in that function. It's just been it's been gospel. It's been biblical for me, to be totally honest with you. And I have, it's at my parents' house right now, but I've got a marked up version that I go back to anytime I'm starting a new business. And so I really want to tap into that a little bit with you. Can you describe, not everybody's familiar with the life cycle, the framework.
So the idea behind this, and this was something that Regis had really pointed me toward, and I guess kind of worked on more, was this notion that when you introduce disruptive innovation into any marketplace or community, people will self-segregate into different strategies for coping with disruption. And there are 5 personas in the model. And they kind of go from most attracted to disruptive innovation to least. So the technology enthusiasts are the people that are attracted to it for its own sake. Like, how does your AI work? Are you using convolutional deep neural networking? I mean, they'll go, geek. And that's important because everybody else in the marketplace is looking to those people saying, are these guys for real or not? And what these people can tell you is, look, I don't know whether the business is for real, but the technology is for real. So it's important to connect with them. But the people that invest initially, we call the visionaries. And they're the people that go, I see, by the way, I get what you're doing. I believe what you believe. I think you're right that this is exactly the problem to work on. And I want to be first. Most people do not want to be first, but I want to be first. And I'm willing to lean in and put the extra effort in and probably the extra money in, because I'm going to use this technology to leapfrog the world. I'm going to be Jeff Bezos. I'm going to take out retail with the internet. I'm just going to do it. Okay. So those are and those people, the technology enthusiasts and the visionaries, we created something we call the early market. And by
the way, is Jeff Bezos the greatest example of this in the past 20 years? That he started with books, but that was never the goal.
Yeah, I would say that what Jobs did at Apple was started with a computer and ended up with music and phones. Was another one. I would say that even something like the first Netflix was just DVDs in the mail. It was a business model thing. But when he went to streaming, that was like, whoa, because that was cannibalistic of his. So these are people who make these bold acting. Of course, our friend Mr. Musk, but electric car, SpaceX, pretty much same thing, right? These people are amazing people that do these jumping ahead kind of things. And we write about them and we talk about them. The one thing that's important is that for most of us, we shouldn't emulate them. You either are one or you aren't, but most of us are not. And certainly most of my clients are not. And so then the question is, what about the other groups? And the next group we call the pragmatists. And most of my clients, frankly, and most money in the world is managed by pragmatists. Now, pragmatists go, look, I'm not an expert in this stuff. It sounds great, by the way. I'm totally, you had me from hello. But I don't know if it's going to really work or not. And there's a lot of issues that have to get solved. So I'm going to wait until I see other people like me doing it. But as soon as I do, I'm highly probable to do it also. So that created the thing called the chasm, because initially it was that sort of junior high dance problem about, I'm not going to go out on the dance floor and you go first, that kind of stuff. So then the other half of that, though, which is important to recognize, is when the pragmatists do start to go, they all go at once. So that creates something we call the tornado. So the chasm and the tornado were just the inverse of each other. The chasm was a block voting not going in yet, and the tornado was block voting all in, right? And so then the question became, and that's why these tech firms look at all these incredible valuations, and you think, where is that coming from? They're losing money. Why are they so valuable? Well, because they're in a tornado. Everybody and his mother's going to buy this stuff. They're grabbing market share. Once they have market share, they'll be able to monetize it, blah, blah, blah. And we have all these stories. But the chasm story was, but how do you go from chasm to tornado? And that's where we got to this notion of the beachhead market, which is, I need to get that first group of pragmatists over the hump. And so, well, who are they? Well, and we ended up saying there are two requirements. They have to have an urgent use case that's putting them under pressure and that they can't solve with their current solutions and technology. So that means they're predisposed to get near the chasm. And second of all, they have to be in the same industry, in the same profession, so that they talk to each other. Because remember, pragmatists talk to each other in order to decide, are we going to do this or not? So you want to go to a single vertical market with a single use case, and you take that. The strategy was just go nail that use case. Do whatever it takes to make that use case for that vertical market a complete and total success. When you do that, it's a little bit like winning the New Hampshire primary. You don't win a lot of delegates, but you just became a credible candidate for the presidential nomination. And so it was a hugely important thing. And by the way, the other thing it does, and this is important for UpdateAI as well, is this is the fastest way to get to a $10 million business. By the way, it's a B2B play. You and I had a conversation offline about B2B versus B2C. Crossing the chasm is a B2B playbook. It is not a B2C playbook. So it's important to remember that. But in a B2B world, it's the fastest way to get to $10 million and $20 million. And at $20 million, if you're sensible about the way you're managing your money, you got a business that you can fund yourself. You don't have to like go begging to the next round of venture capital. You want to raise growth rounds, and that's where venture capital comes in. But you're no longer at risk of going out of existence, which is the other thing. The valuation of somebody that's crossed the chasm. So the Wildcat Technology Ventures is raising a fund called the Crossing the Chasm Fund. It's only going to invest in the Crossing the Chasm stage because the evaluation you get there is such a big step up for such a modest amount of risk. It's not the huge exit yet, but it's huge valuation step up.
You're saying right after you cross the chasm, that's when you're going to invest.
Yeah, no, before, but we're going to be the company that takes them across the chasm. So in other words, in order to get there, you have to have product and market, you have to have customers, but you still have not cracked the code as to that. But you haven't won that beachhead market. That's
Do you have product market fit at that point?
Well, you do not have product market fit. You have product. And really, if you think about crossing the chasm, it's the first instance of guaranteeing product market fit. And the way you guarantee product market fit is you pick a problem, which you find the hole, and then you figure out how do I fit my thing into the hole. But the market is saying, please put something here. I need something right here. So the market is predisposed to find fit if you're willing to fit yourself into that problem niche.
So it sounds like if you're gonna, so by starting out with this beachhead, with this just a smaller addressable market, but it's a very niche thing. By definition, you have to find a very salient and acute pain. I would imagine.
Absolutely.
If it's obtuse, then it's not going to work.
That's right. It's got to be acute. And the other good thing about this thing is acute pain in small niche market guarantees that no established enterprise will ever try to get your customer from you. They hate this kind of customer. It's too small for them. If they won the entire market, it wouldn't mean anything to them, and it's going to take a ton of work. So for all kinds of reasons, this is an open opportunity for you to essentially build a market constituency with almost no competition, provided you're willing to make the extraordinary sacrifices necessary to serve their weird case in their niche market.
I read your book, like I've said now, in 2008. I was the founder of my first startup called Interactive Sports Network. So I'm a contemporary of Mark Zuckerberg. Fun fact, I'm one of the first.
Does he have more money than you?
Debatable.
Yeah. Well, particularly with that meta thing. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, we're doing an MPV, right? This is the future. There we go. Right. So, but so yes, I was the first 100,000 user on Facebook back in college. But in any case, so there's this thing called social networking that was burgeoning, that was mushrooming. And I said, well, I want to do this for sports. And I had certain reasons behind that. And so I started Interactive Sports Network as the umbrella company. But my sub company was called hockeybarn.com. So it was an affinity driven community for ice hockey fans and players and so on and so forth. It didn't work out for a lot of reasons, but I got a lot of lessons out of it. But I bring this to you because we did talk offline about this. And I told you that reading your book was inspiration to me in choosing hockey as my first go-to-market beachhead. Didn't ultimately work out. One of the things that didn't work out is that I didn't really feel like I was going to get the economies from hockey when I started it. And I'll be totally honest with you. I have a little bit of that concern right now with customer success, right? Because it is.
But let's talk about the difference.
Yeah.
So hockey fans are not under urgent pressure to solve a hockey fan problem. Okay. Okay. I mean, they're not. The whole thing of B2C, it's a completely different value proposition. It's much more around fads. It's much more around the contagion and viral networking. By the way, I find it totally amazing, and I'm not particularly competent at it. So I just sort of stand back and go, "Whoa, that's really cool." But it's not crossing the chasm, and crossing the chasm is not the right playbook to use if you're starting a social media company. Now, what would be interesting to do? I don't know if you noticed, but our friends in social media are having trouble with the advertising model because they have overplayed that card to the point of exhaustion, and people are sick of it. And so now there's a really interesting B2B2C play where the B2B play is, I'm going to call up Mark and say, hey, Mark, listen, dude, this advertising thing, you need a little help with it. You got a leak in the bucket. But the point is, that would be a B2B play. That would not be a B2C play. Yeah.
How about PLG? What about a product-led growth play?
So product-led growth is better suited to volume ops because the problem with it's an interesting play. Complex is the B2B people are interested in product-led growth, but it's not so critical. But in any high volume business, you can't have a customer success manager call. The product has to be the customer success manager. And so product-led growth is absolutely critical. If you're going for consumer market or even small business market, it has to be product-led growth.
Yeah. So you a few months ago, you gave a presentation at Gainsight's Pulse conference, and you showcased the customer success maturity model. And you talked about how, we've gone from traditional value delivery where it's all about the product delivering the value, which I loved as a product manager, by the way, because that puts you on the pedestal, right? Competitors are the reference point. How does our product compare to theirs? And then we kind of have now turned into what you called the modern delivery, value delivery stage, where it's, well, there are services as well that we're delivering value in addition to the product. And customer retention is important. And there is this thing called churn. And now we're in this inflection point, I guess, where it's really about customer outcomes and delivering customer value. That's my takeaway of your maturity model. But can you describe that model in your own words?
Well, the most important thing is in the 20th century. So I started in the 80s. So I've got about 20 years in each side of the turn of the century. So in the 80s and 90s, it really was about high-tech products were the key ingredient to this change. And so it was a very product-centric world. The engineer was king, and the product manager and then you marketed and you sold it. And by the way, when the customer bought it, from then on, it was the customer's problem. If
Right.
your product did what you said, if the spec said it did, and the customer wasn't getting value, that's too bad. That's their problem, not my problem. Because the business model was a license and maintenance model. And even when it wasn't working very well, they didn't want to throw it out, so then they would maintain it. So basically, the customer had low power and the vendor had high power. Okay, flip the bit. And by the way, the tech bubble bursting was the catalyst for converting from that model to this century's model, which is the customer having more and more power. First of all, they have more informational power, but second of all, they're also able to consume more and more products as a service. So Mark says, software as a service, and then we have cloud computing, and you have cloud as a service, and all of a sudden, the customer it becomes the scarce.
Was it the tech? Was it the bubble bursting, or was it cloud computing as a result of that?
Well, remember what we were trying to do in the 20th century was make products better, faster, cheaper, and more ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. So, and there was a lot of things contributing to that. The whole bringing China into the global economy, bringing India into the global economy, was an enormous amount of outsourcing to take costs out of the system, et cetera, et cetera. So and to create a higher volume of product at lower cost. At some point, you create enough volume of product and services that's not the scarce ingredient. Now the scarce ingredient is the customer, and that's how the customer got more powerful. So now all of a sudden, customer success goes from a nice to have to a must have, because once you hook a customer, then the last thing you want to do is have them fall off the line, right? I mean, you want to get them into the boat, and then you actually want to have a fish farm. I mean, you like to have a vibrant, living relationship, whatever it is. A little bit cynical to call it a fish farm. It's all right. Okay. But the point is that all of a sudden now, whatever organization is closest to the customer has the best opportunity to detect signal as to the health of the customer. So this notion of a customer health score is at the core of customer success management, and because they're the closest to it. And by the way, we also put telemetry in our product, and we want to infer customer health from telemetry signals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now, if the customer is the most powerful thing, we want to retain the customer, and we also want to upsell and cross-sell, and that's where product-led growth comes in. All that stuff requires us to take our attention away from competitors and products and put them on customer experience and value and outcomes. And the reason why outcomes become important, initially with the consumer product, the outcome is, well, I saw another dog video on Instagram. But in a business, the user wants to be more productive, but the buyer, the budgeter, wants to get outcome value realization that says, look, you've made my business a better business, and that's why I'm giving you more money. And that is not obvious. If you made like, for example, when Microsoft made products in the 20th century, they had no feedback. They would ship Windows, they would ship Office, whatever it was. They didn't know what features you were using, so they just kept on putting more and more and more and more stuff into these products to the point where they became, frankly, unmanageable because they had no way of knowing. But they didn't care. Because you got to upgrade to Windows, you got to upgrade the next issue of Office. Well, now it's the other way around, and so now we do have to care. And again, when we have tailwinds, it's one thing, because in tailwinds people forgive a bunch of stuff, or maybe you can just live with the churn and grow your way past the churn. But in a downturn, you cannot do that.
So we're entering a downturn. You've shared the evolution of the customer being first. What's the next part of that evolution? Where do we go from here?
Well, so I think that, first of all, the downturn can be very, very good for a company. It's painful, but it's like anything else. It's like going to the gym. It's painful, but it can be good for you. Because, for example, let's take Google and Facebook, our friends at Meta or whatever. They overhired and overspent at a staggering amount because, frankly, they could. They just had more money than God. Okay, so now all of a sudden it's like, no, you have to get real. And by the way, the metaverse, the thing I've got a tweet going out this today says, it's great to see the future, but when you're there, remember to look at the calendar to figure out what year is it, because the metaverse is way too early, in my view, for the play that they made. But it wasn't that it's not going to happen; it's just wrong year.
Well, wait, hold on. But doesn't that violate the crossing the chasm? Aren't they going after the early adopters here?
No, well. But by the way, it's fine to go after the early adopters, but that doesn't scale, right? We know that we have to get the pragmatists, and right now, even whether you're a consumer or a business, the metaverse is still, I think, it's. I'm not sure it's in a mirage, but it's definitely on the horizon. It's not. The oasis is not right in front of you. It's not exactly ready to consume, despite the fact that these objects are obviously very, very sophisticated and very, very cool. But anyway, so I do. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So just the idea of the downturn is it enforces discipline, it enforces focus, and it enforces a focus on outcomes that can be prioritized. So nice to have works with tailwinds. Nice to have does not work in a downturn. So it even should have is at risk. Must have works in any economy. Must have is a smaller core, and it's harder to serve. But it has higher outcome value, and so that's kind of the key in a downturn is to just you contract your business and you get more you get better at the things that matter the most. Just back to John Doerr, measure what matters, focus on what matters the most.
Yeah. This podcast is followed by folks, individual contributors and decision makers, leaders in the SaaS world. Out of your portfolio, a collection of books that you've written, what's one that they should put?
Well, for the entrepreneur, it is Crossing the Chasm, I think. But for anybody in a large corporation, the last business book is called Zone to Win. And Zone to Win is simply, how do you manage a crossing the chasm? How do you catch the next wave when you're in a company that's built a huge franchise on the current or prior waves? And that becomes a problem because when you're a startup, you get your money from venture funding. And venture capital is designed to invest in disruptive innovations. And so they may not invest in you, but they're going to invest in something disruptive. But in a large corporation, most of your investment, in fact, often all of it, has to come out of operating income. And you're part of typically a publicly held company where shareholders are looking at quarterly results shareholders don't care as much about quarterly results as we say they do, but they use them as a signal of your health. And so in the and they're not used to understanding, they understand that disruption is expensive, but they're not used to funding it themselves. And so it creates a huge amount of conflict inside a large corporation as to how to allocate budget. And most importantly, how do you stay the course at a time when your quarterly performance is going down and your shareholders are getting angry with you? But if you don't stay the course, you're gonna miss the way. And so the book is about how would you organize and then a company to manage those stresses and strains. And it is I think it's going to be as popular with large companies as Crossing the Chasm is with startups.
Geoffrey Moore, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the program. I've learned a lot in this episode as in all the readings of your work in the past. So really appreciate it.
Well, Josh, thank you for the kind words. It's a pleasure to be here.